themselves as those with horns, and everyone else doesn't have horns and thus lacks honor. So that's how they think about it. In any case, when you hear me mention the horned, you know what I'm talking about. So without further ado, this is going to start on page 147 in case anyone wants to follow along. Chapter 8, The Worm of Calcaris. The day the dragon arrived was a day of death. He came from the north, a shadow upon the wind. Soft and silent, he swept across the valley, blotting out the sun with his velvet wings. Where he landed, field and forest went up in flame. Drifts of ash choked the streams. Beasts fled, and horned also. And the sounds of grief and terror rent the summer air. The dragon was named Vermund the Grim, and he was an old and cruel dragon, canny in the ways of the world. Word of him had come from the north, but never had there been a hint or warning that he had forsaken his lair in those frozen, far-off reaches. And yet, there he was, black as charred bone, with a polished gleam to his fitted scales and a throat packed full of fire. The youngling, Ilgra, watched with her friends from beside the spring-fed pool where they so often swam, high in the foothills along the eastern side of the valley. From that vantage, she saw the dragon ravage their farms with fire and claw and the sweep of his jagged tail. When the warriors of Clan Skagaro attacked with bow and spear and axe, Vermund's flame consumed them, or else he trod upon them, and thus made an end to their ambitions. Even the sharpest blade could not pierce his hide, and the Skagaro had no spellcasters to aid them in battle. As such, they found themselves at the mercy of the dragon, able only to annoy or inconvenience him, but not to stop him. Never that. Like the evil worm he was, Vermund ate every person who came within his reach, male and female, elder and youngling alike. None were spared. Their livestock too he ate, corralled them with fences of fire, and feasted upon the helpless animals until his chops were clotted with gore and the ground a crimson shambles. All that and more Ilgra saw. She could do nothing to help, so she stayed by the pool, though to wait hurt as much as any wound. Those of her friends who weren't so wise ran to join the fray, and of their number, many were lost. As the dragon approached the hall of her family, Ilgra bared her teeth in a helpless snarl. Closer it came, and then closer still, and then with a slow-moving swipe, the scaled monster crushed her home. A howl tore from Ilgra's throat, and she sank to her knees and grasped the tips of her horns. Does she live? Does she die? Read page 150. In any case, I have been standing up here yammering for quite a while. I would love to at least attempt to answer some of your questions, and then we will move on to the signing proper. So, yes. You.
Oh, okay. I have a question. Is it possible for dragons to be conjoined twins, and if so, what will happen?
Question is, would it be possible for dragons to be co-joined twins? And if so, what would happen? Well, I think they might find it difficult to fly, unless it was just two necks and two heads on one body. And two, they would be very, very hungry. So, not impossible, but definitely something to be careful around. I'm sure they'd be very nice, but they'd be very hungry.
Yeah.
Yes? What inspired me to make Allegazia? Do you mean the world or the story? The story. Well, I loved reading science fiction and fantasy growing up. I was homeschooled my whole life, and as a result, I graduated from high school early. mainly the result of not taking any summer breaks my whole life. Thank you, Mom. And I live in the middle of nowhere. So I graduated and I thought, no school, this is awesome. And it was awesome for about 2 weeks. And then I got really, really bored. Now, I say that and you think, oh, he's just bored. No, you don't understand how bored I was. I need to give you context. I was so bored, I went into our backyard and I started to dig a hole. And this hole was about from it was about from there to here, and it was about 9-10 feet deep through basically solid gravel. And then we had one of those old satellite dishes abandoned on our property. Now, for those of you who are younger and don't have white in your beard, I can't believe I can say that now. Satellite dishes used to be absolutely enormous, huge. And so there was one abandoned on our property, and I went over and I grabbed it and I dragged it over to the hole and I tipped it on top of the hole. And then I took hay bales, because I live in Montana, there are hay bales everywhere, and I piled hay bales on top of the satellite dish for insulation, and then I ripped dead bark off dead trees along the Yellowstone River by our house and used that to make shingles on top of the hay bales, on top of the satellite dish, on top of the hole. Now you might be wondering how I actually got into the hole with all that stuff piled on top. I did what every normal, well-adjusted teenager does, and I dug a tunnel into the hole. And then I started chopping down those dead trees I mentioned earlier, chopping them down with a claw hammer, because I didn't have an axe. And I dragged them up on our property and started planting them upright in the ground to form the framework for what was going to be a Viking-style mead hall. When I'm bored, I'm really bored. So, at that point, I realized I needed to do something else in my life aside from digging a giant hole. But the thing is, I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't in school, I didn't have a job, and the nearest town was 30 minutes away driving, and I didn't have my driver's license. So, it was a wonderful experience in one way, and I think everyone should have this experience, where you have a chunk of time in your life where you don't have to do anything aside from take care of yourself. And whatever it is you choose to do in that time is probably what you should pursue as a career. Whether it's spending time with people, whether it's math, science, working with machines, playing video games, making video games, whatever it is. And in my case, that thing was stories. I loved reading fantasy. I wanted to replicate the feeling I got from a good book. And I had read a book called Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher by Bruce Coville. Yes. By the way, he's awesome in person. It's a great book set in the real world about a young boy who goes into this antique shop and he ends up buying a stone that turns out to be a dragon egg. And I loved that idea so much of a young man finding a dragon egg that I started asking myself questions like, what sort of a world would a dragon come from? How might that egg show up in a forest somewhere? Who else would be looking for the egg? And so forth and so on. That's how you build a story. That's how you build a world. You ask questions and answer them. And that is how I started writing and got into the world of Aragon and Alagasia. Long answer to a short question. Yes? How did I come up with the names? Great question. A couple of different ways. Some of my names are word plays. So Aragon is dragon with the first letter changed from D to E. I was 15! But I do like it because it also means an era gone by, an era gone, which felt appropriate for the story. Saphira is a play on sapphire. Yazuak is an anagram for the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, little things like that. The rest of my names tend to come from either historical sources, like Old Norse or Germanic sources or Russian sources, or I invent them according to the rules of my imaginary languages. As an aside, I've always said if I could go into Alagasia and live there, I'd go live with the dwarves because I like their language so much. And I would write dwarvish opera. And I once told my agent that I was going to write an opera in Dwarvish. And he said, go right ahead, no one's going to read it. And I don't know, I'm not so sure about that. But, yeah, and actually, I have a theory, that if you write fantasy long enough, you spontaneously grow a beard. And I actually have presented this theory to a bunch of other authors at various fantasy conventions, and they've all agreed with me, including the women. So just putting that out there. Yes?
The character Arya, was she inspired by a real life friend?
Was the character of Arya inspired by anyone in real life? I wish! Alas, no. Arya was the hardest character for me to write because the exact opposite of a 15-year-old homeschooled guy is an over 100-year-old elven princess. But I learned a lot by writing her character and learning to see her as Aragon does, not as he wants her to be, but as she actually is. Yes?
A lot of fantasy things, like Tolkien, view their story as like a prehistory to the modern Earth, but some are just entirely separate. Do you think this is like a prehistory to now, or is it just like an entirely separate universe?
Is Allegazy a prehistory to the real world or a completely separate place? It's a completely separate place. Yeah, so it's not leading up to the modern era in the modern history like Tolkien's work does. So, yes?
Is there anything you would change?
Is there anything I would change? Yes, all of it. I know I could do a better job writing the series now because I'm more technically skilled. If I were to change anything, like story-wise, not a huge amount. The one thing I do wish I had done would have been to have another chapter or so from Nasuada's point of view in Eldest, when the Varden go from Trondheim to the country of Serda. There's a lot that happens there, and I don't really show it to the reader, so I would have liked to have done that. Yes?
Will there be another Aragon book?
Say that again?
Will there be another Aragon book?
Will there be another Aragon book? Do you mean with him as the main character, or?
Either way.
Either way? Yes, there are going to be lots more books. I just have to write them. Yes? What's the rarest colored dragon? Tie-dye. You'll have to shout, please. Could I demonstrate the twist that the Elvish greeting does? I could, but I would be self-conscious, so I'm not going to. Yes?
So you've been doing this since you were 15. Can you say some like ups and downs of like publishing that like, because I'm an aspiring writer, so I'm curious.
So the question is, I've been doing this since I was 15. Can I say anything about the ups and downs of this profession? I can. I could do a whole presentation on that. There are challenges with this profession like any other. The first one is that you have to be consistent. You have to sit down every day and work at your work, which is difficult when you don't get an immediate payoff emotionally or financially. You have to be willing to commit yourself to something for a minimum of a year for a large book. And a lot of times it's closer to 3. And with my science fiction book, it's been closer to 7 or 8 years. You know, can you work on one project for that long? That's challenge 1. Challenge 2 is getting it actually published. And if you do get it published, people will say mean things about it. Doesn't matter how good your book is, people will say mean things about it. That's okay. You can't write something that's going to please everyone. You have to make your peace with that and write something that's the best you can write and hopefully will please some number of readers. And then on top of that, financially, this is like any entertainment job, this is a career of ups and downs. You know, you will have periods where you get nice big royalty checks, hopefully, and then maybe you don't publish a book for 7 or 8 years. Fortunately, people still enjoy reading my books, so, you know, I can do this for a living, but for a lot of authors, you can't afford to have that sort of a gap. You have to put out a book every 1.5 years, 2 years minimum in order to keep this going. So those are all the challenges. Staying physically fit is important because you sit all the time. So, you know, exercise, diet, that sort of thing's important. Staying mentally. One of the downsides of writing is that it tends to attract people who are introspective, right? You like being by yourself. You like reading. You like writing. So you spend a lot of time writing, and that makes it worse. And it trains you to always think about what could happen. Oh, someone finds a dragon egg. What could happen? And immediately you've got 10 years worth of events in your head. That doesn't always help when it comes to dealing with real world things. You can end up cycling all the time. At least that's been my experience, and talking with a lot of other authors, it is a downside. So all of those, the ups are wonderful. The ups are getting to meet folks like you. The ups are knowing that you wrote something people actually care about. The ups do make it worthwhile, but you have to take a balanced approach to all of it. And the other thing is, if you write something bad, it doesn't make you a bad author. Seriously, every single author writes a bad sentence, a bad paragraph, a bad character, a bad chapter, even a bad book. As long as you're willing to fix it, that's okay. If you accept right now you will make mistakes, and that's a natural part of the process, you become immune to failure. That is a superpower. There are so many talented writers who start writing and then they get editing and they get discouraged and they just never finish their work because of that. So if you accept right now that I'm going to write a bad sentence, I'm going to write a bad book on occasion, and that's okay, you just became unstoppable. So the question is the exact size of the dragons at the end of the inheritance cycle. Tweet me that, and I will tweet you a piece of art that shows you their relative scale.
Is it on DeviantArt?
Yes, you've probably seen it.
I have it in my camera.
Okay, you already have that art. I can't give you exact sizes because...
I've gone to actual math to try to figure this out.
Awesome. Well, I'll be sure to futz with their sizes in the next book just to keep you on your toes. Yes?
Is there any chance there will be any follow-on movies
Is there any chance there will be any follow-on movies
to
to the one that wasn't made? I hope so. I would love to see a remake of the thing that wasn't made. Whether or not, you may or may not know this, but the first movie was not made by 20th Century Fox, and Fox Studios was bought by Disney this year, which means that technically Arya is now a Disney princess.
Nice.
Now, whether or not Disney is going to want to do something with Aragon, I have no idea. Personally, I think it really fits them and they could do something with it. If they do move in that direction, rest assured I will be writing the screenplay and I will be a tyrant on set. Funny thing is, I was actually going to have a cameo in the movie, but I was touring at the time, so it didn't work out. But I asked for it and they agreed. They were going to fly me out to Budapest, Hungary, where they were filming, and I was going to get dressed up as an Urgle, as the shortest Urgle ever. And I was going to appear in the final battle, and I was going to get my head chopped off by Aragon on screen. Because who doesn't want to get killed by their main character, right? Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but maybe one of these days. Yes? How did I come up with the friendship between Aragon and Saphira, especially starting so young? I think that when we're teenagers and we're going through adolescence, we all want a best friend, you know? We all want someone who really understands us and what we're going through. I mean, heck, I'm just turned 36 and I still like having that. And especially when you're a teenager, knowing that you have a friend who really, truly understands you, has your back, and can eat anyone you don't like. I don't know about you, but that's a good friend. Yes? Sorry, can you say that? What do I think of the Percy Jackson? So the question is about, Aragon versus Percy Jackson films and everything. The only thing I'm going to say on that topic is a lot of the same team that worked on Aragon did the Percy Jackson films. So you can make of that what you will. Yes? What is my sister's favorite trait that I wrote into her character? Her tendency to be infuriatingly cryptic and obscure. Sorry?
Who selected the accents?
Who selected the accents in the audiobook? It was actually the reader, Gerard Doyle. He is Irish, but grew up in Britain and the US, so he could basically do a whole bunch of accents. He's the one that chose them originally. These days, I'd probably have a little more say in that, but he did a wonderful job reading the books, so, you know, and it was nice to have him back for The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm.
Indeed, love going. So, I've always been a fan. I didn't like the movie, but I always thought that it would be great as an anime instead. Would you ever be, like, consider that?
Would I consider it an animated version? If it were done in the style like The Last Avatar or something, sure. Last Airbender. Sorry, Last Airbender. Yes.
What is a cool or emotional memory from touring that you have?
What is a cool or emotional memory from touring? I have been chewed on by a sugar glider while touring. I've had multiple events where blood was shed. Please, let's not add another one to this list. I've got a couple of actual scars from touring. I've had people give me swords. I've had, honestly, my favorite one has been meeting families where they've named a child after one of the characters. You know, that just is amazing. And incredibly humbling. That and the woman who got my face tattooed on her thigh. So. What are you gonna do, right? I would love to keep answering your questions, but there are a lot of books to sign, so I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. However, if you want to ask your question as you come up to the signing, feel free. Now, before you all get up and go away, there's something I want to do. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to take a picture here so I can show my publisher that I'm actually working. So everyone say, Aragon!
Aragon!
Awesome. And there are so many of you, I'm still trying to get you all. All right. Second of all, I just want to thank you again for coming to this event. It means so much to me that people are still reading the books after, you know, half my life working on them. And I am so excited about the new book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I hope you enjoy it as much or even more than The Inheritance Cycle, especially those tentacles. And if you want to stay up on the news with all of this, you can check out my website, paolini.net, or you can find me on Twitter or Instagram, Facebook. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I post lots of things like videos on how to shave Angora rabbits. It is family friendly though, if that can be family friendly. And lots of news about the writing and stuff. So I hope I see you there. So again, thank you, and as Aragon himself would say, Sioners Verdar Sitya Havas. May your swords stay sharp.